Okay, I'm only halfway through East of Eden. I'm listening to it on Audible, and only the two parts I already feel like I need to talk to somebody right now, you, whoever's watching this, because there's so many things that have gone on, and it's been such a surprising book. And I feel like it's like if I wait all the way to the end to talk about what happens, I'm sure I'm gonna leave a lot of parts out. So I wanted to just like get out a lot of my thoughts on the first two parts. So if you're reading and you haven't finished the part two, then definitely stop and finish that before you watch this. If you've read the whole thing, then I'm only gonna go up to part two. So if it sounds like I'm missing huge chunks of the story, it's because they may not have happened yet. But a few things really stand out. And this is something that people read in high school and in college. I read John Steinbeck in high school and I loved Cannery Row. And then East of Eden, I started reading when it was like on Oprah's book club, and they had a really nice edition in print that I loved. And so I started reading it, but I don't think I got past where I'm at now. The first part is a lot of like building up, the setting, the main characters. It's two families, the Hamiltons and the Trasks, but it doesn't really open up like with both of the families. It's sort of multi-generational. So one of the confusing things that I'll clear up for you if you haven't read it or you're confused about it, Samuel Hamilton, the patriarch of the Hamiltons, is a generation older than like Adam Trask, for example, who's like maybe like in his 30s and 40s during part two. So we see Adam Trask and his brother grow up in Connecticut, which I didn't know at the time until I did ChatGPT research that. So the Trasks were from the East Coast, and then that's also where Kathy Ames, the monster, is from. And that's like a huge thing that I want to talk about because I just feel like the depiction of evil with the character of Kathy Ames, who becomes Kate and does so many wild things that it's like, this book was published in 1952. So it's like, but it's really about the era between the Civil War and World War I. And I feel like a lot of times, like a lot of these times are sort of like, they become almost like nostalgic to the point that you think that people weren't as bad as they are now and people weren't doing crazy things or like ruining lives. And it's like, no, they actually were. You just maybe didn't hear about it on social media, for example. But Kathy Ames' character is like, I feel like such a good depiction of evil to the extent that she could very easily fool society into, with that coverage of like, being a small married woman or, a little girl in her hometown and just like all of the horrible things that somebody like that is capable of. I think it goes to show that you can't really judge like evil and bad things based on any type of person or any culture or anything like that, because no matter where you are, it is kind of like pervasive. And I think that the way that that character is written is such a good example of going against a lot of the paradigms of what's right in society and what's moral, but on the face of it, she could fool you so easily with using, I think, a lot of the biases of the time. And I think that's also a really important segue into the fact that like the themes of this book are just so relevant now. And I feel like the thing I like about like epics and classics and stuff like that, like Anna Karenina and this and other stuff, it's like they show you that it's like, again, like what they talk about, it's like a time of massive change, society's changing, technology's changing, but back then it was more like becoming more agricultural and, like sort of the beginning of like our, American society and how it is now. So it was still very similar to the extent that things were changing. There's one generation Samuel Hamilton represents, which is, from the 19th century. And then I think Adam Trask and then the kids and all of that represent the 20th century and that turn of the century generation. And so again, very similar. I'm a millennial, so I could 100% relate to living in two different times, one before drastic change and one after society has transformed completely. And I think that that is one of the really great things that this book represents. And again, I've only gotten up to part two, but I just had so much that I want to talk about before I finish that I feel like this was going to end up being a two-part vlog no matter what. So I figured I'd just sort of share my thoughts now leading into the second half of the book. Another standout character for me is Lee, who is first generation Chinese American. I'm a first generation American, so I completely relate to already that struggle of, being from somewhere that you've never been. He did actually visit China, I believe, in his lifetime. But he sort of represents, there was a really amazing line when he was talking to Samuel Hamilton about how when he sort of does like a typical like Chinaman sort of like presentation of for the people that like he works for example. And he tells Samuel Hamilton that he's like, he speaks normally, like he's a first generation American. He was born in the US, but the way that he presents it is that like he has to do the Chinaman thing, because if not, people don't actually see him or hear what he's saying. And I relate to that so much. Like I feel like just being from Miami, it's like, you know, if you don't do the Spanglish thing and if you don't do certain like Hispanic things, like people just don't know what to do with you. And so I feel like that was such a really poignant part of the introduction of Lee as a character. And the fact that, again, like even back in the day, like even though things were different, like so many things were the same, where people do see society as a whole, even without social media or without being connected. Like this character's still able to be like, these people don't see me as one of them, so I need to give them a character that they can comprehend and understand, because they just don't get it. And I loved that about Lee. And I think with the Kathy Ames thing being like so evil, like it is also one of those things that's completely unexpected in this story, because it's just like, I don't know why, like, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, like I just feel like people, like evil always feels like so new, and like the new generations are like ruining society because they're doing this. It's rock and roll, you know, it's like a bunch of like other stuff, but it's like evil is something that has been like a part, you know, of humanity since the beginning of time. And so I feel like this book does a really good example of depicting an evil that can completely exist along the lines of what is acceptable from society. And I think that that's what Kathy Ames represents. Like she's able to just be a small, fragile, like little girl, and that cover that society offers her allows her to really be and do really horrible things to people. And I think that's an interesting commentary about society and about the coverage that, you know, not being an other, for example, can give you to really do harm to other people. So I love that element of this story. And so again, like I'm only at the end of part 2. I haven't even started part 3 yet, because I feel like I needed to get a lot of this stuff out. But you know, I really do think that it's a worthwhile read, to the extent that it really does. I think the reason why, for example, that this book is always recommended, and I've seen it, you know, on social media, not just like when I was in school and I had to sort of, you know, read Steinbeck. And I think that the reason that it resonates so much now is because so many things about human beings just don't change. And I think that when we watch stuff like The Gilded Age and things that are set around similar times, we're seeing a representation of high society, and we're into the glitz and the glam and all of that. And we still do see that they are very similar to how we are now. But seeing sort of just the way people, you know, in this book, like have to migrate, you know, to start a new life, and making decisions, and how those decisions like affect future generations, and how, you know, people get away with things, and how there's still sort of like unconscious bias at that time. We just don't have certain names for everything, but it is still so representative. I feel like it could almost be about the turn of the 20th to the 21st century if you just change a few things around. You know, if it were technology in Silicon Valley instead of the Salinas Valley, like it wouldn't be that different thematically, because I think that that's kind of the point. He really gets to the crux of human nature and what is good and what is bad, and what we want to pass to generations, what we have control over, even when it comes to our own actions and our own ways of dealing with society. And, you know, also that fight between generations, I think, is so relevant. Like now it's like boomers and Gen X and Gen Z and whatnot. And back then it wasn't any different. Again, we just didn't have the monikers. It wasn't like this generation against that generation. It was Samuel Hamilton's versus, you know, the Adam Trasks of the world. And it's just like one of those things that I feel like I was so dying to talk about this, and I'm not even done with the book. And I feel like that is the best way to even introduce this to anybody else. It gets you thinking about things, and it's also just so, it sucks you in so much in a way that is so interesting. And it's just easy to understand, but also sort of gives you that like classic, vibe where you are going back in time and it is a different time in America. But again, even with everything still feeling exactly the same. So I'm gonna finish it probably very soon. I think this took me a couple weeks. I listened to about a chapter a night, and I'll give my thoughts on the whole novel once I finish. But again, if you've read or started reading or are interested in reading, I highly recommend it. This is not sponsored in any way, shape, or form, but it just comes from my desire to like, again, just like saying how evil Kathy Ames is was just like something I wanted to share because I feel like it's like, it reminds me almost of like It, the movie, which I didn't even watch, but it's just like those quintessential evil characters that, are born evil, and I don't even want her to have a redemption arc. Like, I feel like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, no, like, it's like she's cast out that demon. Like, that's kind of how I feel about her. And, and I'm not like mad about it. And I'm sure there are certain biases and all of that stuff that are present in that. But again, I think that just the character is just so well written, and it's just really great. Again, if you want to read the original, read it, listen to it, however you consume books. It's one I definitely recommend if you're gonna do the classics, and especially if you're interested in that time in America, and again, just human nature in general, and sort of how it is transcends time to an extent, and can just be pervasive in generations. Like, it is crazy, but crazy in a good way. So if you haven't listened to it, you haven't read it, and you want to start it or you want to talk about it, let me know in the comments.